On a fierce sunny afternoon of summer, David sat behind his ball-black SUV, each finger tapped on the steering wheel. The street stretches in front of him, empty and surrounded by high lawns reaching out like lush silk, sprinkled in the hot heat. He glanced at his watch, silently a word. The important meeting is less than an hour left, but when the car started rolling on a narrow countryside, a sudden shock from a deep pit, followed by the sound of a broken mechanic of the tire collapsed. It is unbelievable, he told himself. His voice was tired and disappointed. He sighed, pulled the car to the curb, leaving a bunch of matte dust behind him. The hot feeling rushed into his face as soon as he stepped out of the car. He had to adjust his vest neatly and relax the tie. David bent down the flattened wheels, glancing at the torn tires, rubber peeled everywhere. He glanced at the empty road before his eyes and tried to see his phone, but there was no signal at all. Dead, he muttered, pushing his phone into his pocket. He stared intently at the tire, feeling helpless in his heart. In David's world, situations like this rarely occur. There are always assistants, private drivers, service teams ready to solve all problems. But here, on this deserted road, no one, only him, the SUV broken and the stifling heat. David's thoughts returned to an ancient time, when he was a young man. He recalled the time before he had difficulties, was left and no one helped. The memory of the cold faces, the distant eyes left in him a bitter feeling, is why he always hates to rely on others. He shook his head, repelling that memory from his mind, but the heat added tension in his chest. The sky is clear, no clouds, and the closest sign of human presence seems to be very far away. He needed to find a solution before the date of the end disappeared into the darkness. Suddenly, David frowned when he saw someone's shape moving towards him on the road. A blurry figure on the horizon gradually became more pronounced as the person approached. He straightened up, trying to identify his face. It was a boy, no more than 14 years old, wearing an old t-shirt and old sports shoes. As he got closer, David could see his determination on that childish face. "Hello, your car is broken, right?" the boy called up, stopped a few steps in front of the SUV. His eyes were frank and curious to look at David. David hesitated for a while, feeling both relieved and alert in his heart. "Yeah, the tire collapsed," he answered, trying to keep his voice calm. "I don't know how to fix it." The boy nodded, approached closer. His eyes glanced over the fragmented rubber pieces, and looked back at David. "I can help you," he said, then knelt down to check the tire. David frowned, wondering, "Wait, can you really do it?" He looked at the boy with suspicion, because in his lavish life, he rarely had to rely on strangers, especially a boy. But the boy still kept his confidence, a soft smile on his lips. "Yeah, it's just a tire, sir. Nothing is difficult," the boy replied. He stood up, wiped the dust. "Usually the spare tire lies in the back of the car. Let me see." David just nodded. The feeling of insecurity was still not calm, but there was no other choice but to let the boy proceed. He stood still, watching the boy move confidently behind the SUV, opened the trunk, and quickly found the necessary tools along with the spare tire. Without hesitation, he began to remove the broken tire, holding the moving tools skillfully. He really did, David thought, feeling sweaty on his back due to the heat and insecurity from this situation. The boy worked quickly, regardless of the dirt and weight of the tire. After a while, he looked up, sweat dripping on his forehead. "Are you okay?" "He looks a bit pale," David panicked, licking his lips. "I'm fine, just not familiar with this." The boy smiled slightly. His sincere gaze made David unable to not pay attention. "It's okay, really nothing. Just know where to find and how to work." David silently observed the boy completing the spare tire. His hand quickly tightened the bolts and finally stood up, wiping his hand with jeans. He stepped back and raised his thumb. "Done, sir." David winked, almost did not believe his eyes. He hurriedly removed his wallet, pulled out a few banknotes and held out in front of the boy. "Here, this is the money for you for helping." The boy shook his head, stepped back immediately. "No need, I don't want to take anything. Just want to help you, you seem to need it." David felt awkward when he saw the boy rejecting the money. His hand and his wallet held his wallet. "Actually, I really want to accept it." But the boy just smiled, shook his head again and started walking towards the road, waving a later, "Take care of yourself, sir." "Good luck to the place you are coming." David stood there, watching the boy disappear on the road, feeling confused and difficult to spread in his heart. He still held his wallet in his hand, not knowing what to do next. After a long time, he sighed. The feeling of insecurity did not disappear. even increased. This brief but hidden meeting made him unable to forget. David returned to the SUV, put it into his pocket and sat down, starting the car. When he started driving away, he kept looking into the rearview mirror. The figure of the boy gradually faded away until completely disappeared from his eyes. He continued to drive, but his mind could not be quiet. The feeling of restlessness from that encounter was horizontal, as a reminder of the surprise and unexpected links between the two people from the two completely different worlds. When the wheelchair continued on the countryside, David began to think about the meaning of this meeting, maybe luck or a message that the boy wants to convey. He recalled himself as a boy like that, full of enthusiasm and ready to help others without asking for anything. Perhaps this meeting has evoked the memories and emotions that he tried to extinguish in his heart during his years to become a successful businessman. David pressed his lips, focusing on the road ahead, trying to push away the sorrowful thoughts, but they still clung to him throughout the journey. When he drove his luxury SUV, he could not stop his mind wandering back and forth images of the meeting that day. The boy's smile, the way he refused money, and the simple election he swung behind all whirled in David's head. What makes him feel insecure is not the boy's actions, but his own reaction. He was not used to losing control when there was no power that money brings. David retreated the car to drive the house. The gate automatically opened when the modern SUV glided into the campus. The modern, sophisticated house where everything looks perfect but cold. He stopped the car, turned off the engine and sat there for a while, looked at the empty windshield. I'm late, Clara, my wife appeared at the door, smile on her lips, but her eyes turned to worry when he saw his face. Yes, David replied quickly, trying to smile. He took the briefcase and climbed out, closing the door stronger than the will. There is a little incident on the road, just a tire farting. Clara crossed his arms and tilted his head. Has the tires have been deflated? Have you fixed it? David hesitated for a moment and added, there was a boy who came to help me. He corrected it for me. He shrugged slightly, trying to hide the uncomfortable feeling. I don't want to receive anything from him. Clara smirked, his eyes curious. Really don't want anything? David nodded, his face became more serious. I rejected the money he suggested, just help and leave. Clara looked at him for a long time. It was amazing, now that people do not often do good without asking for anything. David just silently responded with a cold nod, walking back and forth in the house. Yeah, maybe I don't understand why, but your words make you feel uncomfortable. It may be because you are right, or maybe you know you will never do the same thing. The evening passed, but the strange feeling still did not leave David. At dinner, he hardly touched the food. Two children, Ellie and Josh, kept talking about their day, but their voice was reduced, far away. Clara noticed that and gave him a worried look. What is happening? David looked up, blinked several times and shook his head. Nothing, just. I don't know. He stopped. The words seemed to be clogged in his throat. That's the boy. I can't stop thinking about it. Ellie, a daughter, looked up from the phone, curious appearing on her face. What boy? Dad. David sighed, put down the fork and leaned back on the chair. As mentioned, the boy helped him repair tires without receiving money, just as if it was the most normal thing in the world. He brushed his head, trying to understand his pressing feeling. I don't understand that, Josh. Why do you feel like that? Josh, a son, smirked, smirking. Perhaps he is just a good person. Father. David startled in response to a sharp look, but did not say anything. Clara observed him carefully, his face softened. Sometimes people do good just because they can, not because they expect to respond. David frowned. But it's not reasonable to you. Everyone wants something from others. Clara nodded slightly. You are right, but not everyone is the same. David stood up, pushing the chair back with a cheesy sound. Anyway, I need to go out. Clara just nodded, his eyes following him after he came out. He stood there for a long time, his hand plugged in and overlooked the lawn to be carefully cared for. He wanted to reject this feeling, forget the boy and continue his life, but there was something still clinging to him, the boy's eyes, smiles and how he simply helped. At night, David has trouble sleeping. His mind was still chaotic. Clara slept when he finally went to bed. He lay on his back, looked up at the ceiling, trying to push away the feeling of nagging unexpectedly. It was just a tire that farted, but for some reason, it had a special meaning. The next morning, David woke up with a feeling of determination. Although unknown why, he feels need to find the boy. He didn't know what he would say or was the boy there, but he had to try. He quickly wore everyday clothes instead of the usual suit. Clara looked up from a cup of coffee, his eyebrows frowned surprised. "Where are you going?" "I will return to where you have a tire," David nodded, prepared to leave. "I will find the boy." Clara hesitated, looking at him for a long time. "I will wait for you at home." David smiled quickly and climbed into the SUV, concentrated mind. He recalled the passing road, feeling helpless when he saw the tire was farting. The journey to the place does not take much time, but today the scenery seems different, less threatening, and more familiar. He slowed down when he approached the location, parked on the side of the road and walked out, looking around. The sun was warm, he felt sweaty on his neck. His eyes swept through the scenery and then saw the small, old house lying away from the road. David moved forward, feeling both hope and worried. What if I was wrong? He shook his head, continued to walk to the front yard. Not neat, some toys were scattered. He stopped at the path, took a deep breath before knocking on the door strongly. The door cried out the engine inside, then opened. A woman standing there, looking surprised at him. She looked at him with vigilant eyes, realizing the distinct difference between him and the surrounding life. "Can you help me?" she asked. The voice was cautious. David cleaned his throat, trying to keep calm. "Yes, I'm looking for a boy, about 14 years old. Yesterday, you helped me to fix the car." Her gaze softened, she nodded slightly. "Do you want to meet Lucas?" David nodded, feeling a little relieved. "That's right, I want to talk to him." The girl's eyes glanced over the back shoulder and called, "Lucas, here. Someone is waiting for you." David heard the footsteps rang out and Lucas immediately appeared in front of him. Lucas's eyes widened when he realized David. "Oh, hello," he greeted with a smile on his face. David took a step forward, full of emotions. "Lucas, I want to find you. I can't stop thinking about what he did for me yesterday. I need to do something to repay him." Lucas shook his head, the smile still did not fade. "I told you, nothing. I just want to help." David stared at him, trying to understand the sincerity and kindness he showed. This was strange to him. But David knew he couldn't let things like that. "Please, David," he insisted, "there must be something I can do for you and your family." Lucas looked at his mother, who bodied a slight nod. He returned to David, his eyes deep, thinking perhaps something. David felt a ray of hope flashed. "Whatever you need, just say it." Lucas's smile is more fresh. "How to invite you to breakfast. We don't have much, but it will be very happy if you come." David blinked, hesitating. He opened his mouth but locked it and nodded. "Okay, I am very happy." The door of the house was wider and David walked in, feeling the change in his heart. He didn't know what it was, but maybe this was the beginning of something better. This place is compact, neat, but also a bit old. The smell of coffee and fried eggs spread in the air. Lucas's mother was busy preparing breakfast, while David sat uncomfortable, not used to the environment like this. Everything around him was strange. Lucas sat opposite David with a smile on his lips. "So, how do you come back?" he asked, clearly curious. David scratched his chin, choosing his words carefully. "You know, I can't forget yesterday." He looked around the kitchen, looked at the simple curtains. The wooden floor was cracked. "He helped me and I want to repay. I can't let things like that." Lucas shook his shoulder, took a sip of the juice. "Actually nothing. We should help each other, right?" David stopped. The simplicity of Lucas's words made him feel almost silly. Throughout his life he built on the idea that nothing free, all actions have a price, one thing to return or an advantage. But now, Lucas treats kindness as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Lucas's mother placed a plate of fried eggs and toast before David. "Not much, but you just naturally use it," she smiled softly. David looked down at the food plate and looked up at her. "Thank you, it's really enough." They ate in silence for a few minutes, only the sound of the dish of the chopsticks collided. David kept looking at Lucas, the way he interacted with his mother, the warmth in his eyes completely opposite to his own house recently became cold, distant, like a trading than a family. Communal house. Communal house. Lucas looked up suddenly. David's eyes met. "How are your successes?" What do you know? David stopped and chewed in a thoughtful way. Busy, he finally answered. Many meetings, many responsibilities. He looked at Lucas to see the curiosity in his eyes. I guess most people think it is only luxurious parties, but it can be quite lonely. Lucas nodded slowly. I understand. People probably see the luxury car and think he already has everything. David smiled slightly with a bitter feature. Yes, that's right. He looked down at the dish of food, pushing the eggs around. Sometimes I think I have lost really important things that make life worth living. Lucas tilted his head to think. Perhaps you only need a reminder. He smiled again, his smile as before. Help others, just by side, feel good, right? David blinked in surprise. Yes, that's right. He nodded slowly. Lucas's mother gently purified the air. We don't have much, but we try to help when we can. That's how my mother taught me, and I was teaching Lucas. David nodded, looked at her and looked at Lucas. I did very well. His voice sincerely. Lucas is a good boy. The room sank into silence that David was not used to. He leaned back on the chair, relaxing for the first time for a long time. Not about luxury or material, but only about being together, sharing meals and connecting. When the meal ended, Lucas stood up, picked up the empty plate of David and arranged them along with his plate. So now, what will you be okay? He asked with a smile on his lips. David smiled softly, shaking his head. I think so. He hesitated, then looked into Lucas's eyes. I really want to do something for you and your family, not because I owe you, but because I want. Lucas exchanged gaze with his mother, who had a nod. Lucas returned to the girl's eyes, glanced over the back shoulder, and called, Lucas, here? Someone is waiting for you. David heard the footsteps rang out and Lucas immediately appeared in front of him. Lucas's eyes widened when he realized David. Oh, hello, he greeted with a smile on his face. David took a step forward, full of emotions. Lucas, I want to find you. I can't stop thinking about what he did for me yesterday. I need to do something to repay him.
Lucas shook his head. The smile still did not fade. I told you, nothing. I just want to help. David stared at him, trying to understand the sincerity and kindness he showed. This was strange to him. But David knew he couldn't let things like that. Please, David, he insisted, there must be something I can do for you and your family.
Lucas looked at his mother, who bodied a slight nod. He returned to David, his eyes deep, thinking perhaps. Something. David felt a ray of hope flashed. Whatever you need, just say it. Lucas's smile is more fresh. How to invite you to breakfast? We don't have much, but it will be very happy if you come. David blinked, hesitating. He opened his mouth but locked it and nodded. Okay, I am very happy. The door of the house was wider and David walked in, feeling the change in his heart. He didn't know what it was, but maybe this was the beginning of something better. This place is compact, neat, but also a bit old. The smell of coffee and fried eggs spread in the air. Lucas's mother was busy preparing breakfast, while David sat uncomfortable, not used to the environment like this. Everything around him was strange. Lucas sat opposite David with a smile on his lips. So, how do you come back? He asked, clearly curious. David scratched his chin, choosing his words carefully. You know, I can't forget yesterday. He looked around the kitchen, looked at the simple curtains. The wooden floor was cracked. He helped me and I want to repay. I can't let things like that. Lucas shook his shoulder, took a sip of the juice. Actually, nothing. We should help each other, right? David stopped. The simplicity of Lucas's words made him feel almost silly. Throughout his life, he built on the idea that nothing free, all actions have a price, one thing to return or an advantage. But now, Lucas treats kindness as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Lucas's mother placed a plate of fried eggs and toast before David. Not much, but you just naturally use it, she smiled softly. David looked down at the food plate and looked up at her. Thank you, it's really enough. They ate in silence for a few minutes, only the sound of the dish of the chopsticks collided. David kept looking at Lucas, the way he interacted with his mother, the warmth in his eyes completely opposite to his own house recently became cold, distant, like a trading than a family. Communal house. Lucas looked up suddenly. David's eyes met. How are your successes? What do you know? David stopped and chewed in a thoughtful way. Busy, he finally answered. Many meetings, many responsibilities. He looked at Lucas to see the curiosity in his eyes. I guess most people think it is only luxurious parties, but it can be quite lonely. Lucas nodded slowly. I understand. People probably see the luxury car and think he already has everything. David smiled slightly with a bitter feature. Yes, that's right. He looked down at the dish of food, pushing the eggs around. Sometimes I think I have lost really important things, things that make life worth living. Lucas tilted his head to think perhaps you only need a reminder. He smiled again. His smile is before help others. Just by side, feel good, right? David blinked in surprise. Yes, that's right. He nodded slowly. Lucas's mother gently purified the air. We don't have much, but we try to help when we can. That's how my mother taught me, and I was teaching Lucas. David nodded, looked at her, and looked at Lucas. I did very well. His voice sincerely. Lucas is a good boy. The room sank into silence that David was not used to. He leaned back on the chair, relaxing for the first time for a long time, not about luxury or material, but only about being together, sharing meals and connecting. When the meal ended, Lucas stood up, picked up the empty plate of David and arranged them along with his plate. So now, what will you be okay? He asked with a smile on his lips. David smiled softly, shaking his head. I think so. He hesitated, then looked into Lucas's eyes. I really want to do something for you and your family, not because I owe you, but because I want. Lucas exchanged gaze with his mother, who had a nod of a nod. Lucas returned to the skin. David felt Clara's eyes filled with questions and a slight smile on his lips as he approached her. Clara raised an eyebrow and asked, "Have you found him, David?" He nodded, stopping in front of her. "Yes, I found him." He hesitated for a moment and continued, "I have breakfast with them." Clara was surprised and smiled. "Breakfast? It sounds like a walk in the right direction." David nodded again. His smile became more radiant. "That's right, I think so." He glanced at the car next to him, then turned to his wife. I think I want to do more, not only for them but also for others. This feeling is right." Clara approached, put his hand on his arm. "Perhaps you finally realized what was really important." David looked at Clara, a softer expression. Probably like that. They stood there for a moment, silence between them full of new understanding. David knew he had a long way ahead, but for the first time after a long time he felt he was on the right track. He was not sure what would happen next, but he knew he had to pursue it. The next morning, David woke up with a determination to surprise himself. He needed to help Lucas and his family, but more than that, he wanted to feel the connection, the feeling of doing something meaningful. He was not sure exactly what was pushing himself, but the feeling of deprivation turned into a closer determination. After a quick breakfast, David started to call. He contacted the people he knew in the area where he was trapped, contacts through business people who knew the local community. But the feedback was mostly vague. No one really knew the boy he was talking about. David ended the final call in disappointment, leaning back on the office chair looking at the ceiling. There was something wrong. He had enough resources and power to make a miracle if necessary, but he could not find a boy who helped him. The feeling of losing the connection weighed on him. He shook his head, pushing back from the desk. No, he won't give up so easily. He needed to go out to find Lucas with himself, whom he had talked about, not to understand that this was not only a temporary idea but also much more important. Even if he could not express the reason, David took the key and left, telling Clara that he would return later. She looked at him with a knowledgeable eye, just nodded. She seemed to understand her silence, that this was what he needs to do for herself. The trip returned to the rural road faster than this time, but David's mind was not peaceful. He glanced at something familiar, searching for a small house to live in. Lucas. He had breakfast with Lucas. He stopped the car on the sidelines of the rock. His heart beat hard, but he could not fully understand why. David knocked on the door, the knocking of wood stuck under his nail. After a while, the door opened and there was Lucas's mother, along with the surprised eyes as before. "Mr. David," she said, eyebrows lifted slightly. Unexpectedly he returned so fast. David smiled and nodded. "Yes, I know, I just want to talk to Lucas if okay." She glanced at her shoulder, calling Lucas, "Come here." A while later, Lucas appeared. His eyes glowed when he saw David. He approached the spacious smile. "Hello, come back because of the flat tire." David smiled softly. "No, not like that. This time I really wanted to talk to you. I thought about what he said about helping people unconditionally, and I wanted to help you, Lucas. I want to do something meaningful for you and your family." Lucas looked at his mother, nodded slightly, his eyes warm but cautious. He returned to David, "We really don't need anything, you're okay." David approached closer. His voice became softer. "I understand, but I want to help, Lucas. Not because I owe you or have to do, but because I want to make a difference." Lucas thought for a moment and then returned to his mother, who stepped in with curiosity and caution. "Mr. David, what are you going to do?" David took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "I was thinking that I could help repair the house a bit. Not too luxurious, but I knew I could make it comfortable more for the whole family." Lucas looked at his mother, and she exchanged a look and returned to David. "We never asked for help, but I found this meaningful to him and also meant to us. Someone wants to help just for a good reason." Lucas smiled and nodded. "If you want to help, we may need a bit of repair. The roof is leaked, and the kitchen also needs a bit." David felt a smile on his lips. He nodded in thanks. "Thank you. I promise to make this house more comfortable for the whole family." Returning to the SUV, David felt the full determination. He called a few times on the way back, contacting partners in the construction industry to arrange repair. When coming home in the evening, Clara was waiting in the living room. She looked at him with gentle eyes when he saw his face changing. "Did you find him already?" she asked softly. David nodded with a sincere smile. "Yes, I found it, and I would help them, really help them." Clara put the book down, approached him, put his hand on his arm, her eyes searched in his eyes. "You are doing good things, David. Not because of money, you know it, right?" David looked into Clara's eyes, his voice firmly. "I know. This is about something else, something I don't know I needed." Before she smiled, holding his hand gently. "I am proud of you." David nodded, feeling something warm and strange in his heart. The next day, David parked in front of Lucas's house, the sound of gravel crushed under the wheel when he stopped. He invited a small group of workers to assess the status of the house to be repaired: the roof, the plumbing system, and some other items. It was with a bright smile. "Hello, ready to embark on work?" David laughed softly. "I will leave the hard work for experts." Both entered the house, starting this meaningful new journey, not only to repair a house, but also to rebuild relationships and create real values in life. David arrived early in the morning, his SUV due in the usual place in front of Lucas's house. The fresh air of the morning carries a new smell of grass cut from a nearby field. He looked at the old house that was now repaired with a patched roof and significant improvements. Today they will continue to repair the water pipe system and start replacing some worn floor plates in the living room. David walked out of the car and saw Lucas sitting on the porch waiting for him. The boy's face was radiant when he saw David. "Hello, you're back." Lucas shouted, jumped and ran towards him. The boy's excitement spread so that David could not help but smile. "Of course I came here," David said while stroking Lucas's hair. "I told you that I will be here until everything is done." Lucas nodded, and the voice was a little softer. "Your mother kept saying that we didn't need all these, but I thought she was really happy when he helped." David looked through the front door where Clara was standing. Her gaze looked at them with a small smile. He nodded to Lucas and said to Clara, "This has a great significance to me. This is not only a repair of a house, but also doing something really important." Clara smiled slightly, understood David's feelings. "We don't need anything too luxurious, just enough to be able to live comfortably. We have managed ourselves, but it is good to have help." David glanced at the roof of Greg, a sturdy worker who was starting to knock. "I don't come here to change your life, just to make things a little easier." Lucas moved forward, gently placed his hand on his mother's shoulder. "We are lucky, isn't it, Mother? Not everyone can receive help like this." Clara nodded. His eyes still did not leave Lucas. "We are the Lucas family and we don't despise this help." David felt a warm feeling spreading in his heart, a feeling that he had not experienced for a long time. He realized that he had built the walls around himself, hidden behind success and money, but here, in the middle of this old house, he felt like he was really connected to this family. Throughout the day, the team worked hard. Lucas helped in places he could, carrying tools and supplying materials. David was also surprised because he joined more than he thought, kept the ladder, moved the nail, even closed a few floor plates under the supervision of Greg. He felt the sweat falling on his back, his muscles ached, but it felt better than ever. It was the feeling of completion, the sincere effort he had never experienced for many years. When the sun began to set, the worker was completed the work of the day. The roof has been patched and the kitchen pipe system has been improved. Although the work is not completed, it is a good start. David stood back and forth when Lucas ran into the water. His laughter echoed throughout the house when the faucet operated smoothly. Clara stepped up beside David, his eyes full of emotion. "You have made a big difference, David. I don't know how we can thank you." David shook his head and smiled. "You don't need to thank me. Actually, I am the one who owes you more. And in addition, you add, when I look at Lucas smiling, I think I am receiving a lot more than what he realized." Lucas ran up, stopped in front of David. "Will you come back tomorrow, right? There is still a lot of work to do." David nodded, put his hand on Lucas's shoulder. "Of course, I'll be here in the end." The three of them stood there for a while, observing the cleaner and prepared for tomorrow. The cohesion and meaning filled the atmosphere around them. David knew that he had a long way ahead, not only in repairing the house but also in better understanding the new path he was going. But now he feels satisfied when every day, every nail, each replaced board has brought him closer to something better. David felt a new belief in his heart when he saw Clara and Lucas smiled and welcomed every morning. Simple breakfasts in the small kitchen have become the most valuable moment of his day. Although the present life is not sufficient in material, the warmth and happiness that Clara and Lucas brings makes David feel truly belonging to this place. One morning, when the pale yellow sunshine through the window, Clara announced that they would start a big project upgrading the entire house to bring maximum comfort to the whole family. David did not hesitate to agree, and with Greg and members of the construction team, he started planning detailed plans. They decided to expand the living room, create more green space in the garden, and install solar power systems to save energy. Lucas, with his enthusiasm, is always eager to participate in each stage, from painting wall to choosing colors for each room. While working, David gradually understood Clara's life and Lucas. He knew that Clara had suffered many difficulties after her husband died, but she still maintained the house and raised Lucas alone. The stories that Clara shared about the difficult days made David touched and more determined to help them overcome this difficult time. One afternoon, when the whole team was lunch break under the big tree in the backyard, Clara invited David to participate in a coffee session. The two sat together, watching Lucas play in the garden. "Clara," said David, "I really don't know how to thank you. You not only repair the house but also bring hope and joy to our family." David smiled, feeling his heart warmly. "Nothing, Clara. I just want to help the good people I meet. My family is really important to me, and seeing you happy is the biggest reward." Day by day, the construction project progressed rapidly. The old walls are replaced with large glass panels, creating natural light filled with living space. Lucas's bedroom is equipped with a new bed, study desk and bookshelf, where the boy can focus on studying and creating. Clara also added a relaxing area with the trees and the paintings that Lucas draws himself. One evening, when the project was nearly completed, the whole family held a small party to celebrate the results. The friends in the construction team were also invited, creating a cozy and happy atmosphere. David stood outside, watching the new house under the shimmering light, feeling the deep connection he built with Clara and Lucas. In that moment, David realized that he was not only repairing a house but was also building a new family, where he found the true meaning of human love and cohesion. He knows that this journey is long and challenging, but with the support of Clara and Lucas, along with determination and love, they will overcome all difficulties and create a bright future. Then, in the end, when the sunset fell, David felt his heart filled with hope and happiness. The house is not only a shelter but also a symbol of friendship, solidarity, and love. He found what he had lost, and knew that from here, his life would never be alone again. When the work was accumulating, David's passion did not fade. He often observes Lucas' boy with admiration and love. Lucas did not see the job as a burden but an opportunity to participate in building something sustainable. One day, Lucas ran to David with a blushing face in the sun, a bright smile. "Hello, see this?" He pulled David's hand, and David followed him to the back of the house where a group of workers was installing new windows. The old windows were cracked, to let the wind cold in the winter, now replaced with double-toughened glass to help keep the house warm in the cold months. "Is it wonderful?" David Lucas spoke with glittering eyes. "No more cold wind blows at night." David smiled and nodded. "Yes, it's wonderful, Lucas. This will make a big difference." Lucas looked up at David with a more serious voice. You know, I never thought we would have this. I always try our best, but this is far beyond our expectations. David bent down, put his hand on Lucas's shoulder. You deserve, Lucas. I and my mother, and I am just happy to be able to help. Lucas smiled. His eyes glowed. You are so good, David. You are always a good person, I know. David swallowed and felt a choked emotion. Thank you, that's great meaning to you. As the day gradually passed, a group of lunch workers with sandwiches and lemon juice brought out by Clara. Everyone gathered around the porch to eat, a simple meal but feeling like a party. The workers laughed. Lucas talked excitedly with Greg about work, while Clara sat next to David with his eyes full of satisfaction. David looked around, feeling like he was in a real family, something he had not felt for a long time. Not about money or success, but about people, about connection, and part of something bigger than myself. After lunch, the group of workers returned to work, and David stood with Clara on the porch again, watching Lucas run and jump happily. Clara looked at David with a reflection. David, if you don't mind, can you tell me why you do all this? She asked gently. David stopped, thinking for a while before answering. He thought he had realized that he was lacking something. He spent his whole life pursuing successfully, thinking that was the most important thing. But meeting Lucas, seeing the way the boy helped without expectation, what makes you realize that life is more than just money and power? Clara nodded, soft eyes. Sometimes we only need simple things to see what is really important. David smiled. And I think I need to be reminded of that. They stood there for a while, the sound of the workers and Lucas' laughter around. David took a deep breath, feeling the peace that he had never had. He knew he was on the right track, and this was just the beginning. The sun began to set low on the horizon as a group of workers cleaned up their belongings. Greg nodded goodbye before getting in the car. Clara called Lucas inside to wash his hands, and David found himself standing alone in the yard, looking at the house. It is still not complete, but gradually becomes more perfect. Not only did the house change, but David himself changed. He felt a deep change inside, a new understanding of what was really important. When he turned away, Lucas ran out. His hair was soaked after washing his face, excitedly calling, "You will come back tomorrow, right?" David smiled and nodded. "Of course, Lucas. We have a lot of work to do." Lucas smiled brightly, raising his thumb. "Great. I can't wait anymore." David watched Lucas run home, waving his hand before disappearing. He stood there for a longer time, watching the house and the garden, everything they had built until now. This is not just a project but a new start for all of them. He boarded the SUV, starting the engine with the feeling of satisfaction that he had never had. He knew this was just the beginning of something bigger, one thing that would change his life in ways he still could not imagine. For the first time in many years, David feels really hoping. When the house was completed, Lucas danced non-stop, his joy as if he could not be hidden. "It looks great, sir. I can't believe it really belongs to us." David turned to him, a gentle smile appearing on his face. "I have one more thing for both of you, Lucas." Clara lifted you, curiosity emitted from her eyes. "What do you mean, David?" David put his hand in his pocket, took out an envelope and gave it to Clara. His face was serious but full of goodwill. "This is for you. Not much, but this is what I want to do." Clara received the envelope, trembling hands when opened. Inside is a neat document. Her eyes widened when he passed the papers, then looked up at David. "David, what is this?" David smiled, warm voice. "This is a trust fund for Lucas so that you can attend college someday or pursue any dream you want. I believe you can do whatever you put your mind in, and I want to make sure you have the opportunity to do that." Lucas looked at the papers and his mouth opened in surprise. "I know this is a great thing and I don't ask, but I want to do something meaningful for both of you." Clara's eyes were full of tears, trembling. "David, I don't know what to say." Suddenly, Lucas approached and hugged David. David was surprised before responding to the hug, full of emotion. "Thank you," Lucas whispered gently. David patted Lucas's back warmly. "Nothing, you deserve it. He is a smart boy, Lucas. You can do whatever you want." Clara approached, his eyes still glowing with light rays. "Thanks, David. you have changed our lives." David responded to her gaze with consistency. "You have also changed your life, Clara." The three people standing there for a long moment, sunset shining to the house, creating a perfect picture. David realized that this was what he was always looking for, not wealth or success, but the purpose and opportunity to make a difference. The last day of the repair has come. The atmosphere around the house is full of eagerness. David came early in the morning, the sky dyed orange and pink gently. He stepped out of the SUV, breathing the cool air of the morning. The house is now completely changed, different from before. New walls and roofs painted, glossy windows in the morning sun, and the porch is refurbished with solid new wooden panels. Lucas hurried to the front door with a bright smile. "Sir David, done. Let's see." The excitement of the boy spread made David unable to laugh. "All right, let me see what you did," David said, following Lucas inside. Inside the cozy and filled house, newly installed wooden floors create a clean and luxurious feeling. The living room is painted gently, with neat bookshelf filled with valuable memories of Clara. Lucas led David to go through each room, proudly pointing out new renovations. The boy's room is a real highlight. The space belongs to him completely. The ceiling has been repaired, no more water leaks. Lucas's new bed with bright-colored blankets and small wooden tables on the window is where he can do homework without worrying about water absorbing. "Now I have a place to do homework and no longer worry about water absorbed into the bed anymore," Lucas said, his face radiant. David smiled, feeling the joy in Lucas's voice. "You deserve, Lucas. I deserve everything." Clara entered from the stove, his eyes lit up when he looked around, really completed. David nodded, his voice softly. "Completed, Clara. And it belongs to you." Clara approached. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "David, we don't know what to thank. You brought more space for the house, you have hope and the future to us." Lucas stood outside to look out the street, returning to a serious face. "Mom, David, I thought about my future. When I grew up, I wanted to help others as you helped us. I want to make people's lives better." David put his hand on Lucas's shoulder, feeling proud. "I will do great things, Lucas. Father has no doubt about that. I had a good start from the first day." Lucas smiled, his eyes sparkled. "I want to do more. I want to make a real difference." Clara hugged Lucas. "And I will do that, I love." The three people stand on the porch, watching the house and the life they build together. This is just the beginning of many adventures and opportunities to make a difference. When the sun set to the horizon, David felt a feeling and hope that he had never experienced for a long time. He knew that he had found the right place that he belonged to. Whatever he put his mind in, he could achieve. David nodded, his eyes met Clara. "And I will receive all the support from you, from everyone who knows how special I like." Lucas looked up at David, his voice softly. "Thank you, I changed everything for us." David shook his head and smiled. "No, Lucas, you changed everything for yourself. You remind yourself of really important things." They stood there in the morning light. The atmosphere was full of perfection. Not only the house or the renovation, but also the relationships they have built, about their friendship. David realized that he came here to repay, but what he found far beyond that: a purpose, a connection, and a family.